What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And last week I was talking about Donald J. Trump becoming president in the US again. This week we have our own version of election fever, taking control of the media here in Ireland, as the election has been called. A general election is going to be held on the 29th of November. Now, the government held off announcing this right to the last minute, and they gave themselves, I think it was just 3 weeks for 3 weeks of preparation for the election. And as of the date that I'm planning to publish this, that means there will just be 10 days to go. So I am slightly ahead of myself. The reason I'm ahead of myself is because I have to go off to Dubai. And so I'm actually recording this in advance of my trip to Dubai, just so that I have an episode in the bag, so to speak. And I'm going to Dubai for a business and wealth conference that's on there. And while I'm there, I've booked a podcast studio in Dubai. You can do this in Dubai. They actually have fully fitted out podcast studios where you just show up and they'll record it for you, and then they'll give it to you afterwards to go, or they'll even edit it for you if you want. So I've gone ahead and booked a couple of slots, and I'm going to be interviewing a couple of people while I'm there. So I look forward to publishing those when the time comes, and I will do an episode entirely on the Dubai market. I have a friend that actually lives there that I went to school with, who is an agent in Dubai, so it should be interesting. And I also have another special guest I'm going to be bringing on as well. So anyway, this podcast is titled The Irish and European Property Update, and what I was planning to do, I was going to talk about the Spanish property market, and in particular, because I own a property myself down there. But just as I was planning to do this episode on Spanish property, suddenly we had the awful tragedy that's taken place in Valencia. And so really my deepest condolences to anyone impacted by that. It's been, the most incredibly devastating floods in living memory, essentially. And as of this moment that I'm publishing, or as I'm recording this right now, the death toll currently stands on 223 people, with a further 78 listed as missing. So we're heading towards over 300 people being killed by this incredible storm. And the storm, if ever there was a sign of climate change coming, this was it, because an entire year of rain fell in just a couple of hours. And so I just don't know how anyone can suggest that that's anything but climate change. The recriminations are swift and brutal, and there are thousands of locals that have been dramatically impacted by this. Obviously, people that have lost their lives, there's families that have been badly impacted by that. And that'll be the first thing. But there's also thousands and thousands of people who've had their cars lost, like floating down the street, their businesses destroyed, their homes destroyed. Now, maybe they've survived it, so they feel grateful for that. But I'm sure, if your business is destroyed, then, it doesn't feel great. And so understandably, all of those guys are, I suppose the best term is, livid with the government's handling of the tragedy. I've just been reading about it today, there were warning tweets, a lot of people will know that you can sign up to Twitter, or X as it's now called, and you can get these alerts on your phone that tell you that there's an extreme weather event coming and whatever. And so these tweets that went out, these warning tweets that were saying, big risk, this is a red alert for weather, extreme weather, they went out hours after the worst of it had already taken place. And so those are now being deleted, and so they're all trying to kind of brush this under the carpet by the looks of it. And so the guys in charge, the people that are responsible for safety and all that kind of stuff, they're running for cover at the moment in Spain. And it was really noticeable how angry the feeling is, because the King of Spain went to visit the devastation, and while he was walking the streets, the public started throwing mud at him and started flinging mud and stuff, just because they're so angry and screaming and shouting and stuff. So this is an unfolding crisis, and I'm sure a lot more is going to emerge about the mistakes made and the lessons to be learned and stuff. So, leaving that tragedy aside, I did want to just mention about the Spanish market, and it is noteworthy. I'm actually going on a podcast, a Spanish property podcast, myself in a couple of weeks' time or in a couple of days' time. And what I plan to talk about before these Valencia floods is just the incredible performance of the Spanish economy in general. Okay, I was looking at the Financial Times headlines just recently, and I noticed something. It just caught my eye, and it was that the Spanish economy is on course to be the best performing economy of the larger economies, like the G8 kind of size countries. And it is on course to have 2025 for the Spanish economy to actually outperform the US economy in terms of GDP growth and stuff. So that is really incredible because, like, for me, I'm just in shock because when I left Spain in 2009, heading to Dubai because I just, everything, the world was collapsing around me when after the 2008 crash. And so I can remember just my property crashing in value, the projects that I was involved in the south of Spain, absolutely basket cases, like complete loss, 100% loss. And so I just saw Spain as this kind of basket case that I had actually accidentally gotten mixed up in. And sure enough, fast forward all these years and it's outperforming the US economy, which is just insane. And so naturally enough, that has had an impact on the property market. And so the property market is doing really well in Spain now. And the tourism, they've actually hit tourism numbers that are the highest ever. And the problem, of course, with that is that there is also a housing crisis in Spain. Now, nothing on a par with what we have in Ireland, but the housing crisis in Spain is partially because of the popularity of the tourism business. And you've got popular tourist destinations where all of the houses and all of the apartments are being rented short-term to Airbnb. And they're being, and so the locals themselves, it's pushed up the prices, and the locals that live there can't find affordable property for themselves. So naturally, this is causing a political issue. But the market has risen. And one of the reasons that it's risen and performed really well is since COVID, a lot of people have moved to remote working and, working through digital or virtual calls or whatever it is. And so a lot of people in northern parts of Spain, but not just northern Spain, northern Europe in general, they have all realized that they can now work remotely. And so the economy down in the south, like the Costa del Sol and along the Costa Brava and stuff like that, all of that is all picking up a huge amount because of the fact that these people now are able to relocate down to the south or down to the east coast and enjoy this incredible climate that they enjoy there. But also there's like, if you're coming from, say, in northern Europe, like Denmark or Sweden or something like that, the cost of living in those countries is very high. And you can move to somewhere like Spain and it's a fraction of it. And yet you maintain your economic earning potential because of your links back to the northern economy. And so the fact that you're able to work remotely is, as I think Tim Ferriss coined the term, geo arbitrage. And that is where you earn your money in a wealthy area, but you spend it in a cheaper area. And so that is why people would move to somewhere like Argentina, and from America, they'd be earning American dollars, spending it in Argentina, and they would live like a king for a fraction of the cost. Anyway, the cost of housing in Spain has risen on average 47.7% in the last 8 years. Or let me clarify, from 2015 to 2023, the Spanish economy saw the housing market rise by 47.7%. Now that sounds pretty good, and it is a solid performance, but it pales in significance when you compare it to the Irish economy. The average cost of housing in Ireland during that same period has risen by 69%. So the Irish housing market is absolutely raging. And, before we all pat ourselves on the back and, for a great job done, recognize the fact that a lot of us are still out there trying to buy. And, you just can't find value at the moment because it's really ramped up. Now, not being able to find value doesn't mean that there is no value, but it means that you have to take a kind of a longer term view, and you have to think to yourself, where will the market be going? And does it make sense right now in terms of the rental yield if I'm going to be renting out the property? You shouldn't really be focused on the capital appreciation, although that will definitely factor into it. But if you look at exclusively the capital appreciation and not the rental income, then you could end up at a situation where it's costing you money. Now, before we all jump on that, there's actually some other economies. You would think that the Irish economy is the best performing in Europe because of, the boom that we're going through in housing and stuff. But there are other European economies that are actually significantly outperforming the Irish housing market. Namely, and I'm going to read out the top three, the Czech Republic. That housing market in those same 8 years from 2015 to 2023, the Czech housing market rose by 111.7%. And slightly ahead of that was Latvia's housing market that rose by 114.2%. But the number one, as far as I could see in this report that I read, was Hungary. And the capital of Hungary is Budapest. The capital of, the Hungarian housing market rose by a staggering 172.5%. And so he gets a lot of negative press, Viktor Orban, but he must be doing something right in the eyes of property investors in Hungary. Now, of course, when you see numbers like that, you might think, wow, that's incredible. But we don't know until we dig into those numbers. Are they coming off of a much lower base? I mean, what was the average price back in 2015 compared with, say, the Irish market or the Spanish market? And if you run them side by side, 172% increase might still mean that they're still lower priced today than when compared to the Irish market. Anyway, all of this is coming from Eurostat, and the Eurostat figures, they're produced by the European Central Bank, I think it is. And I'm going to put a link down below in the show notes just for you to actually see this for yourself if you want to pore over the figures. But the average EU housing number, if you take the whole of the EU and divide it, you get 48%. That's the average increase across the entire EU. And so it's just found it very interesting, and it just shows you that what we're going through in the Irish market is not unique. Like, we're not the only, although we do seem to be, by far, we seem to have the worst or the most acute impact. Certainly the housing shortage, I don't think, is matched anywhere. But you'd wonder if it's possible for Hungary to see 172% increase, which is, close to 3 times what we've seen our increase go up by. That's pretty incredible. Now, something else I want to just talk about, and I was mentioning the Valencia floods there, but this is a topic that came up during the week when I was doing my mastermind call with my clients, and we were talking about how, and this refers back to climate change and stuff like that. We were talking about how, this Valencia flood, it's not long after Eastern European had these terrible, devastating floods. And if you go back just a couple of months and have a look on, social media, you'll see that the Czech Republic, and I know Moldova, because that's where my wife's family are from, and, Romania, all these places, they all had incredibly heavy rain. And so, again, massive flooding, unprecedented flooding levels and stuff like that. And then if you go back a year or two before that, I can remember Germany had this devastating flood where I can't remember the name of the town, but it ran through this town such a torrent of like a river, basically, that it actually ripped the tarmacadam off of the road, or the asphalt off the road, and dug out all of the the ground and the soil underneath to such an extent that you could actually see the sewer pipes like 2 or 3 meters below the street level. And they were sticking out of the ground as well. And it's just absolutely incredible. And there was fatalities in that incident as well. But then you can also go back a little bit further. And I can remember, it's not that long ago, China experienced massive flooding. I think it might have been Shanghai. And I can remember seeing on social media this image of people standing in a subway train, and the flooding happened so quickly that they were still trapped in the subway train with the rainfall up to their neck. Like the train was unable to move and they were unable to disembark, and they're all standing in the train, I guess praying that it's not going to go above their heads. And I mean, absolutely terrifying situation to be in. And then not long before that, you had Australia. And Australia had terrible flooding where I think there was something like 3 or 4 meters of rainfall. And then I also saw heavy flooding in London on social media, where you could see the basements of a lot of houses just getting filled up with all of this. And so to me, when I saw all of that, I was just thinking like, wow, this is exactly what we've been warned about for the last 10 years. Like scientists have been banging this bell for a long time. And this is especially going to be in the news going forward because Donald Trump now president in the US, and he is well known by everyone to be a climate denier. He does not believe that climate change is a thing, or certainly he's not willing to admit to it. And so he's talking about reversing all of the measures introduced by Joe Biden in the last couple of years. And so it doesn't bode well for the future. But an important thing came up during the conversation, and like it's easy to hear all of this stuff, and me reminding you is going to make certain people kind of, feel a little bit of anxiety and concern about the future. And those floods, there's absolutely no way that climate change is not involved, in my opinion, because how can a year's rain fall in a day? I mean, that is not normal. And so there's definitely extreme weather in happening. But it's important to recognize, and this is something that Brian, who's one of the members in our mastermind, he was mentioning this, and it's important to recognize that the growth of cities and that the growth of housing and development in general, like civilization, the expansion of living and working buildings and things like that, this is all a factor as well, that you can't just blame it all on climate change. And the reason you can't is because if you think about it, like prior to the development of a town or a village or a city, if it expands out to a certain way. And I can remember growing up in the area that I grew up, like the kind of Carrickmines, Foxrock kind of area in Dublin. And it was just fields as far as the eye could see. It was quite a rural kind of suburban area. And you look now, and if I stand in the exact same spot I remember standing on as a child, and now it's just housing as far as the eye can see. So I can remember this vividly. And all of that used to be fields with soil or forests with soil. And so when the rain fell, the soil absorbed the rain. But all of that has been replaced with buildings. And if it's not a building, it's a road. If it's not a road, it's a footpath. And all of those surfaces are impermeable. And so where does the rain go? The rain cannot soak into the ground. So it basically stays on the surface and it flows downhill. And so enough rain falls in that location. And of course, it turns into a bit of a river. And further down, it's collecting more and more. And so naturally enough, it builds up. And so this is most definitely an aspect. It's channeling all of the rainfall. And so it's, even if climate change was not a factor here and you didn't have a year of rain happening in a day, you would definitely be having increased flows of water because of the fact that there's nowhere for it to go. It's all of this development has most definitely kind of contributed to that. However, I'm not going to sort of suggest that that is the reason exclusively and that climate change is not a factor. I do think it is. But then the other thing to remember is that there is the media, and the media loves to hype things up. There is the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And it is most definitely true that if there is ever an opportunity to give a worst case scenario versus, the happy, rosy kind of, oh, everything's going to be fine, the media will jump on the really horrible worst case scenario. They will always do that they will run to that first. And why? Because drama and all of that sells more papers, sells more clicks, and that is the reason. And so these media companies are profitable when there is drama. And so it's in their best interests to hype up the drama. And so Brian is quite well read and all this kind of stuff, and he mentioned what's known as RCP 8.5. And I hadn't heard of this myself, but he was explaining how this is a benchmark for modeling the climate. And what it means is representative concentration pathway 8.5. And all very technical, but it comes from this, basically the scenario that the climate modelers use. And what it assumes is that all of the governments in the world do absolutely nothing, and that we continue to develop, society continues to grow and develop as it has done in the past with no intervention. So, we're all now talking about reducing emissions and all that kind of stuff, that all just doesn't happen, and that we just ignore all of that and we just continue to burn fossil fuels and everything like that. And so there's a big argument there as to whether that is a realistic, it is a benchmark that they're using for their modeling, but it's not a very realistic one. It's a worst case scenario. It is, if we do absolutely nothing, this is what we're on course for. And what you'll find sometimes is that the media is quoting is referencing RCP 8.5. So when they're talking about, climate is going to do this and it's going to be really extreme and we're going to have tornadoes and we're going to have this and that and the other, what they're often doing is pulling from the report, the RCP 8.5 part of the report. They're not pulling from the report that's telling you what's likely to happen. They're pulling from the part that was designed as a worst case scenario. And so it's important to remember that, because, and I've talked about this in the context of investing. When you're investing, you have to be very careful that your emotion doesn't get involved. And if you're reading the newspapers and if you're not aware of the fact that if it bleeds, it leads, you could be there reading this stuff and go, oh my God, the whole world is about to kind of implode. It's the same with, reporting on the war and, conflicts around the world and stuff. They will always report on the conflicts. They won't report on, it's the same when there's a plane crash. If you hear about a plane crashing, everyone kind of jumps up and goes, oh my God, traveling on an airplane is deadly dangerous. Or if there's a train crash, traveling on a train is deadly dangerous. The reality is probably there was 1,000 flights that landed yesterday safely. You don't hear anything about that. The papers are not writing about the 1,000 safe flights or the 5,000 safe rail journeys that were taken yesterday. So they will always jump to the worst case scenario. And it's important to remember that, so that you don't find yourself getting anxious and concerned and basically building in all sorts of scenarios into your thinking that don't exist. And so just have a think about that. I think it's important just to remember the media is trying to sell you a newspaper. And we all have a gland in our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala dates back to when we were being developed we were evolving into humans from monkeys and lizards and whatever it was. And the amygdala was this gland that helped you avoid getting caught by something dangerous. And so we automatically notice anything that suggests danger for us. So that's why newspapers pick up these things. Anyway, guys, I hope you found this one interesting, useful. I'm going to be back next week from Dubai, so you'll probably have an episode from Dubai to look forward to. Until next week, I hope you have a great time, a great week, and wishing you the best. Talk soon.